Good morning, everybody. Glad you could join us today. This is Trent Danowski, Deputy Director, TSPC, and this is the TSPC Professional Practices conversation with the districts. I want to make everybody aware of a couple things before we get started. First of all, we are recording this particular webinar session so we can post it to our website for further reference by other district or school personnel as might be desired. Second of all, none of you are muted. I did not mute anybody on my end, but you do have the capacity to mute yourselves and unmute yourselves as needed. There will be several opportunities for everybody participating in the webinar to ask questions throughout the course of the next 45 minutes to an hour together. And we certainly encourage you to do so, but just be aware that I have not muted your line, so if you have not muted yourself, there is a possibility we could be hearing what's going on at your end of things. So just be aware of that. Once again, thank you for giving of your very valuable time. Somehow it's August already, and that certainly snuck up on me at least. But so we're doing this as a kind of a kick-off the school year type of presentation prior to everybody getting deeply involved in opening of school activities. So with that, oops, let me make sure I got the right. Okay. With that, I'd like to just talk briefly about the purpose of this webinar session. It is to provide districts and school administrators updates and refresher information on a variety of professional practices topics. I want to emphasize that this is a professional practices webinar. This is not a licensure webinar. We don't have the personnel in the room to respond to licensure questions today. If you have licensure questions, you can send me an email and I can forward those to the appropriate persons to get a response. But we don't have licensure personnel in the room. We will be doing some update information some refresher information to begin with, some information that maybe you're somewhat familiar with, but we want to just remind everybody of this information, and then we will have new information toward the end of the webinar today. It is an opportunity for everybody on the webinar and online on the phone line to ask questions or seek clarifications about things that might be happening in your school or district in terms of professional practices. And it's an opportunity for you to at least hear from the professional practices team here at TSPC as well. With that, I'd like to take just a moment and have the team here introduce themselves verbally to all of you out there on the webinar. So once again, my name is Trent Danowski. I'm Deputy Director TSPC and Director of Professional Practices.
Good morning, Joanne Candle, Administrative Specialist, mostly responsible for all the background checks.
Hi, I'm Kevin Cooley. I'm an investigator, and briefly you'll see a map that shows what region I cover and some of the other investigators.
Bernie Krieger, one of the investigators.
Patty Sheldon, Administrative Specialist. I mostly help Mr. Van Lannen with the post-commission meeting information.
Mr. Van Lannen.
Mr. Van Lannen.
Jeff Van Lannen, I'm the legal liaison.
Paul Samito, investigator. Thank you. Thank you. And as was so appropriately foreshadowed by Mr. Cooley, here is that map that was spoken of, and this is an opportunity just for if you're not familiar with how TSPC handles investigations. This map indicates which investigator is responsible for which regions of the state. And I also want to bring your attention down to at the bottom where the contact phone numbers are listed. We encourage and invite school districts and schools to contact their regional investigator whenever necessary. If you have questions about how to report or if you should report, two topics that we're going to cover briefly today, but all the same, if you ever have any questions about making a report or a complaint to TSPC, we encourage and invite you to contact your investigator directly, and they are anxious and willing to help you out in those with those questions and in those regards. So as you can see, Christina Edgar couldn't be with us today, but she handles the Portland metro area in the northwest portion of the state, the blue shaded area. Mr. Cooley handles the central, western, and southwestern portions of the state, shaded in green on your screen. Mr. Semino handles the central and eastern portions of the state of Oregon, shaded in what I'm going to call a tan or yellow color. And then we do have a pink shaded area there for Marion and Lynn counties. Complaints and cases originating from those areas are assigned to the first available investigator. And we also have Bernie with us. He's a non-regional investigator. Bernie, would you like to just say a few words about what your role is here?
Basically, my role, I was brought on 3 years ago and should be here for a couple more years, is to assist in getting the agency caught up with their backlog of investigations. And so I'm assigned older cases that have not been completed to help catch up on the backlog so that the 3 area investigators can take on more current cases when they come in.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. As we really get into the meat and potatoes of this webinar, I just want to provide everybody with a brief reminder that we are talking about some, confidential information in terms of the topics today. We're talking about people's careers in terms of professional practices and case investigations. So if you do have questions, please make every effort to phrase your questions in a way that maintains confidentiality of anybody potentially involved at the root of your question. So please, no names, no identifying details. Don't even mention a school or a district if possible. And use generic titles whenever possible when phrasing your questions. We do want to make sure confidentiality is maintained at all times, but also recognize that you may have some very specific scenarios in your district or school that you want to ask about. So when you ask, you're free to ask those questions, just no names or identifying details when you ask them. Thank you. A couple notes about legal mandates and responsibilities. From a TSPC perspective, we are required by state law to investigate any and all complaints that may constitute grounds for discipline under Oregon Revised Statute 342.176. And we are consistently reviewing our internal processes for improvement to better serve the schools and districts in this state. From a district standpoint, the superintendent has a mandate to report to TSPC by Administrative Rule 584-020-41, Section 3, when it's reasonably believed that a gross neglect of duty or gross unfitness has occurred by an educator. And those are some things that we will speak more to in the upcoming slides, so I'm not going to get into those right now, but reasonable belief, what is that and how is that formulated? So that's something that we can talk about coming up here. So with that, what I'd like to do is hand it over to Jeff, our legal liaison, to speak about when to report and some of the finer details in that regard.
Thank you, Trent. The reason why this is important is sometimes we've experienced school districts reporting when they didn't need to, and I think it's important that we communicate to the districts that we do not have the ability to take a report and dismiss it without conducting an investigation. So if we prematurely receive a report from a district that ultimately didn't need to be reported, it ties up our investigators working on that case when we could be working on more difficult, more important cases, I guess. And so I really wanted to define the fact that the chief administrator or their designee has 30 days to report to us. And that's 30 days from the point that they've made that determination that they reasonably believe that gross neglect of duty or gross unfitness may have occurred. That's to allow the local school district to conduct their own investigation in order to come to that conclusion and support that conclusion. We also want to reiterate our support of the school districts in, when in doubt, you can contact your assigned investigator or any of us here to discuss what's going on at the district, what investigation has occurred, and what you have learned. And we will help you try to navigate the decision-making process about whether or not we have reasonable belief or whether or not it is an example of gross neglect of duty or gross unfitness. And we'd be happy to assist you on the phone or via email, et cetera, to help make those determinations. So, which is kind of covered in this slide. So if in doubt, contact your regional investigator or myself, or in a pinch, I'm sure Trent would be happy to help you as well, but between the 4 or 5 of us, we should be always have somebody here available to discuss this with you. Some kind of rules of thumbs and some things that have changed over time. There was a time several years ago when we would investigate reports of an educator who had a DUI outside of the classroom or employment setting. Due to some case law results that have happened over the past couple years, and our overall volume of investigations, the commission is no longer taking any action on those kind of cases. A single DUI that occurs off duty and doesn't involve the school or students is no longer necessary to report that to us. It doesn't rise to a level that the commission is going to take action on. And we still on occasion get reports from districts regarding that. So I just wanted to point out that's one example of something that no longer needs to be reported. And I guess the next button down at the bottom there, a good rule of thumb, if the district itself is not going to take any disciplinary action regarding the conduct, then it's most likely that the commission won't either. And it probably doesn't rise to a level of gross neglect of duty or gross unfitness, and probably doesn't need to be reported to us.
Thank you, Jeff. What we're going to transition into next is just some TSPC advice on conducting a local school district investigation. And after we complete this section of the webinar, there will be an opportunity for participants to ask questions. So if you have questions, your opportunity to ask them is coming up pretty quickly here. So with that, I'm going to ask that the investigators in the room kind of chime in on the next several slides, and I'll open it up to the investigators.
Well, so what I would say, this is Kevin. It's important to establish the policies and procedures for your district doing investigations. I mean, we see a variety of investigators. Sometimes it's a school administrator, whether it's an assistant principal or a principal. Sometimes it's somebody from the HR department. But whatever it is, and whoever's doing the investigation, they should have at least a rudimentary understanding of what it is that they're attempting to achieve through their investigation. And it needs to be consistent throughout.
This is Bernie. Some tips for your investigation. Kind of spring off what Kevin said. Some districts actually hire outside investigators, private investigators that specialize in school district investigations, which can be a helpful tool to you. Other tips: be thorough in documentation: who, what, when, how, where, how, and why. When taking notes, indicate the date, who the note taker is, and the mentioned or involved persons. And good notes are important. The 3 years that I've been here and my prior background in law enforcement, notes are very, very important. And that's one thing that I think all the investigators will agree on is that's someplace that the school districts overall, not specifically, but overall, could improve on is note taking. Summarize your findings and or final action taken. Random documents don't always lead to a clear picture. Ask open-end questions, avoid yes or no. And leading questions, what I found out over the years is probably what you folks need to do is ask the person what happened, and most generally you will get the answers that you need. So follow-up questions, don't just use a script, be prepared to follow the information. And all people that are present in the room, and then when they speak, have them identify themselves on the recorded record as, you know, who's speaking. And then make sure that at the end of the interview that you put a time that the interview is concluded. Take pictures of a scene or injury. This is important, especially if it has to do with injuries to a person or damage to property or whatever. The thing I would advise when you do take pictures, if possible, let's say it's a bruise or a cut or something on someone, is use some kind of a common item to put in the picture as reference to size or length, such as, you know, a coin in your pocket or a car key or the pen in your pocket. Something that you can look at the photograph and kind of at least make an assumption to what the size or length or what it is. So.
Okay.
Moving on.
I can answer this one. This is Paul Samino. When a teacher is suspected of being under the influence at school, there's a few things that you need to do. Mainly, you secure the physical evidence of the alcohol, beverage, cup, water bottle, etc. And then photograph, if you can, the scene of the event. Take a picture of the teacher, I guess, and where the evidence was found. Anything on the blackboard. Then document what happened is the main thing. Date and time, how you become aware, glassy eyes, slurred speech, unsteady, offered sobriety test, indicate whether they went and did a urinalysis, test administration information, and secure the test results. And then, of course, make a list of potential witnesses, who witnessed the teacher's conduct, smelled the beverage, and who administered the test, and date and times.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you to our investigator for running through that with us. At this time, this is the first of a couple of opportunities to ask questions. If you have any questions on any of the content that we've covered so far, whether it be local investigations or when to report, anything along those lines, this is the first opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to pause a moment, see if we have any. Okay, not hearing any, we will move forward, and just know that there are several other opportunities to ask questions throughout the course of this webinar today, so please don't be shy. The next thing we wanted to talk about is briefly how to report misconduct to TSPC. In 2016, we standardized the complaint report process for both school districts and for patrons. we standardized both the submission form and the process overall. Districts are encouraged to review the school district misconduct report guide that is linked to the TSPC website under the professional practices section. It is a one-pager, and I will show you a representation of that document here on the next couple slides. We've also standardized the report form itself, and we encourage districts and schools when submitting a complaint to TSPC to use the official complaint form provided for school districts. When completing a school district misconduct form, please make sure to provide a brief description of the misconduct and not cite an OAR that you believe has been violated. So when completing a school district misconduct form, describe the misconduct and not cite an OAR. That's most beneficial to our investigators, is a description of the conduct rather than a listing of OARs. Please submit your complaint form and attachments in PDF by email to complaints.tspc@oregon.gov. We've received some questions recently from districts about the security of email submissions and whether it's better to email complaints to TSPC or submit them via the U.S. Postal Service. I can assure you that our email system is actually preferred and it is confidential. Fewer people have access to this inbox, this email inbox, complaints.tspc@oregon.gov. Fewer people in this building have access to that than would have access to something if you mailed it via the U.S. Postal Service. So they're far more confidential and secure in terms of sending it by email over sending it by a regular postal mail. Of course, if sending it by U.S. Postal Service is the only option you have available to you, we will obviously still accept them. But in response to a very specific question about the confidentiality of the email complaints, I can assure you there is confidentiality in play there. So this is a representation of the School District Misconduct Report Guide. This is available on our website. I don't expect anybody to be able to read that, because I can't even read that. But it is a one-pager. It does provide some very basic information about making a report as a school district. This is a visual representation of the official School District Misconduct Report form. You'll note at the center portion of that form, the relatively large space in the center is where the description of the misconduct is to be placed. And if you don't have enough room there to fully describe the misconduct, you are allowed 2 additional pages as attachments in which you could more fully describe the misconduct as part of your report. So you've submitted a report to TSPC. What happens next? If you're not familiar with this process, I think this is a good opportunity for districts and schools to kind of look behind the curtain, if you will, and understand the many things that occur once a report is received by TSPC and what that process looks like as it goes through investigation, goes to commission, and then what happens after the commission meeting as well. So for that information, I'm going to put up some very complex slides here with a lot of information and then put it on Mr. Van Lannen to simplify it for everybody. So, Jeff?
I'm not so sure that worked out well yesterday, but I'll try again today. So your report or a patron complaint comes in and it is assigned very quickly to their regional investigators. The regional investigator very promptly will send out a notification to the educator advising them that they're under investigation. About 99% of the time that occurs. There are a few reasons why we don't, but they're pretty minimal. You'll get confirmation of our receipt of your complaint. Then the investigators go through a kind of a priority establishing process where they prioritize their caseload. They investigate the most critical ones first. Then that investigation is conducted. That involves sending out the subpoenas to the districts, conducting interviews with school district staff, interviews with other witnesses, and of course an interview with the educator who's involved in the complaint. A report is generated along with any supporting exhibits or other materials, and that report is submitted to Commission Management. Commission Management reviews all those reports and will make a recommendation to the Commission regarding what action they're suggesting the Commission might take. Those are batched and supplied to the Commissioners prior to their quarterly meeting. They review them, and then at the meeting, we all join them and discuss these cases as necessary, and then the Commission will make a decision, generally to charge an educator or to dismiss a case, essentially. If the case is dismissed, then everyone is advised of that after the meeting as well. If the case is charged, then it becomes my part of my caseload, and I draft what's called a notice of opportunity for a hearing. That's a charging document that explains to the educator what facts we believe occurred, what rules have been violated, and their rights that they have to a hearing. The educator or their attorney at that time can then make a decision. If they fail to respond in a timely manner, then we enter a default order and the discipline goes forward. They can request a hearing. If they request a hearing, then we usually enter into a negotiations phase where I attempt to settle the case for the Commission with the educator, generally resulting in the recommended amount of discipline. And that's called a stipulated order. And if everybody signs and agrees to that, that'll go to the next Commission meeting for ratification. And in the worst case scenario, we go to a contested case hearing where we team up with our DOJ attorney, and that's where school district officials that were involved or witnesses may be subpoenaed to appear either by phone or in person at these hearings to testify. The educator testifies. We put on our case. It can go anywhere from 1 day to I've had as many as 5 days on some of the more complicated cases. And then the judge renders a decision called a proposed order. That proposed order can change over time, but long story short, we end up at the end with a final and public order. And that's basically the post process in a nutshell.
Thank you. One thing that I just would like to bring to everybody's attention, and maybe you've come to this conclusion yourself, is that there's a lot of variables and a lot of things that have to occur throughout the process on our end in order for a case to go from submitted complaint to final order becomes public. Assuming that the Commission charged the educator, the order will become public. There's a lot of things that occur between those 2 points in time, and there's a lot of factors that go into what would affect the timeline of an investigation, including availability of the educator or the educator's attorney and their responsiveness for requests to interviews or documents, travel for our investigators to districts around the state to collect evidence, negotiations with defense attorneys regarding possible settlements. The age of the case itself might be a factor in how long it takes to complete it. And also something to just keep in mind from a school and district perspective, if the case in question is in another venue like a criminal court, TSPC will not take any action on that investigation or on that case on our end until the criminal court proceedings have concluded. So if it's in a criminal court setting or a civil court setting, we will allow those proceedings to fully run their course and come to a conclusion prior to our investigation pressing forward. So there's a lot of things that go into investigations from the time that complaints are received to the time that potentially a final order is made public. Okay, with that, this is a second opportunity for any questions from participants on the webinar. If you have any, this is a time to ask. Okay. Not hearing any questions at this point. There will be further opportunity to ask questions a little bit later in the webinar. Prevention training. What are the common issues reported to TSPC? For these next two slides, I would like to ask the investigators to chime in. Actually, it's one slide with several components to it, but I'd like the investigators to speak to these issues as they will. Thank you.
Well, this is Bernie. Common issues or trends within cases reported to TSPC. As we all are aware of now, the social media is becoming well used by students, teachers, and etc. And some of the things that we find is teacher boundary violations where students and teachers are using social media, text messages, etc. to communicate. And sometimes it's inappropriate or excessive, such as the time of day, the subject matter, the volume, and so that's things that we look at. Student restraints and excessive use of force. One of the common denominators here, of course, is with special ed classrooms where sometimes students become, their behavior is out of control and some type of restraint, proper restraints have to be used. This is one that we have a fair number of reports that come in over the year to us. Falsification of official records. Most generally, this has to do with IEP documentation, most generally, which we look at seriously. There's a 60-day notice educator resignation. There must be a signed contract with that educator, and the district must demonstrate that they actually have, or the resignation without the 60-day notice has really caused a hardship on the district. Educators working on expired or improper licenses, we take a look at this and review it with our licensure section accordingly. And improprieties within the administration of state testing or online courses. The improprieties a lot of times will be with the licensing of educators for like online schools. The school will be offered in Oregon to Oregon students. However, one case that I actually worked on is several of the teachers were not in the state of Oregon. They were in different states, and they were not licensed in the state of Oregon to teach, and that is a requirement of some of the online schools. So moving on.
This is Kevin again. Let me just touch on the educators working with an expired or improper license. These are really preventable things, and part of it is we don't mandate how a district tracks their licensed educators or when the expirations are and things like that. It's obviously that's up to the individual educator, but you guys can emphasize the importance to these educators on maintaining a current valid license in their respective fields so that we don't have these issues of a regular teacher teaching a business class or something outside what they're allowed to teach. So again, and even the second one, the improprieties with testing, those are really preventable things. If the district emphasizes, in their service day trainings and things like that, how important it is to follow the procedures that are mandated by ODE. So with that being said, there was a question that was asked in the question section, but it was done online. And that question is, if a case is dismissed, does the educator still have to put on an application that they've been investigated by TSPC?
The answer, this is Joanne. And the answer to that would be no. If the investigation is completed and they've received their dismissal notice, they do not need to answer yes. It's character question 2, I believe, and it says, are you currently subject of investigation?
I would only interject that a pre-employment questionnaire may phrase that differently that could possibly require a yes answer.
Our application is what I can answer for, correct, Jeff, would be no. But only after they receive their dismissal notice is it truly over.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, so for our applications, the answer is no, but that does not cover application processes through districts or employment applications. Thank you. Thank you, investigators. Thank you, Joanne, for answering that question. Thank you, Jeff. TSPC update. A couple of new pieces of information that you might not be aware of. A lot of what we've covered so far has been maybe review for some of you out there, but this information should be brand new. House Bill 3351 was passed during the 2017 legislative session, the one that just ended, and the effective date for that bill is January 1st, 2018. This bill does have an impact on the professional practices rules and procedures of this agency, so I did want to speak to it today. The bill has two main components to it. The first component of the bill requires TSPC to submit an annual report to state legislators. That annual report is mostly about licensure and program completion matters, and not too much about professional practices. But the part of the bill I wanted to speak to you about today, and at least to make you aware of, is the second part of the bill, which provides TSPC the authority to direct patron complaints back to the patron with direction to contact the employing school district for investigation or resolution prior to TSPC initiating an investigation at the state level. The impetus for this, I believe, was legislators looked at information provided by TSPC through our budget process and other avenues, and they made note of the fact that a lot of patron complaints are kind of jumping the shark in that they are going directly to the state level, and they are skipping over the employing school district level and not providing an opportunity for the school district to one, be aware of the complaint, and two, conduct an investigation if necessary, and ideally come to a resolution at the district level before it goes to the state. This bill was endorsed by the Oregon School Board Association. One thing that I do want to just verbalize is that we TSPC will not be abdicating our responsibilities to student safety with this bill. If a patron complaint comes in to the agency and it indicates a threat to student safety, we will not be delaying that or our actions with that particular complaint or sending it back to the patron. We will take action on that. As far as more details, TSPC is working to define agency rules and procedures prior to January 1, 2018. So once those conversations have been taking place already and will continue, and we are working to hammer out the rules and procedures internally, and once we have those in place, we will certainly be communicating with schools and districts regarding how that will how all of this will function. But I did want to make you aware of House Bill 3351. The other new business, if you will, professional practices is going paperless. All right. After years of paper case files and a statutory requirement to retain materials for 25 years, we've created a rather significant storage and cost for the agency. And we are working to reduce the need for storage and reduce our paper case files. Most of you are probably familiar with TSPC licensure side, which is a little bit further along in going paperless with the online licensure system. Professional practices is really just beginning that process of trying to reduce the amount of paper, physical paper, that is in the office and that needs to be stored by TSPC. We are transitioning through digital scanning of physical paper documents within the agency and paper documents that are received by schools, districts, and patrons. So we are going through the process of scanning those, and that process is ongoing. As far as districts and schools, what can you expect with interactions with TSPC? Well, districts can expect correspondence and subpoenas from TSPC to be sent as an email or as an attachment to an email whenever practical. We will be sending those documents via email. District responses to TSPC can always be sent by the most convenient method for the district, but we really encourage digital submissions whenever possible. So if the district can only send something that's been subpoenaed or requested via the U.S. Postal Service as a paper-based form, that's perfectly understandable, and we will certainly accept those documents. But if it is within your capacity to digitize those documents and send them via PDF and email, that is the preferred method of submission. Any questions at this point in time? And we are going to be wrapping up here fairly quickly, the next couple slides. So if you're holding out on your questions, you're running out of opportunity to ask it. All right. I just want to reiterate this map and give everybody one last opportunity to locate their regional investigator, locate the contact information for that investigator, and again, encourage districts and schools to utilize them as a resource whenever necessary in regard to questions about a complaint or a potential complaint, or if you need to submit a complaint for any particular issue. And with that, we have completed the webinar. One last opportunity for questions. I do want to say before we conclude that this presentation, this webinar was recorded, and we will be posting this webinar as well as the PowerPoint slides to the TSPC website in the upcoming days here. We'll put it within the professional practices portion of our TSPC website for review and use as districts need it. So thank you so much, all of you, for giving of your very valuable time this morning. We certainly hope that this information was beneficial to you, and we certainly welcome and would encourage you to contact us as a resource whenever necessary. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.